Good afternoon, and welcome to MasterMinds Lessons in Leadership. I am joined by my co-host, Peter Linneman, where in this series we discuss the intersection of leadership and strategy, which we feel is at the vortex of what makes great companies great. And we are pleased and honored to have a good friend and a client in the industry, Connie Moore, with us today. Connie has not only run both private and public companies, but she is now in a number of key governance roles across the REIT industry. So, Connie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We're very, very happy and honored to have you as a guest on the show. And if you could take a couple of minutes and just give the audience a little bit of a sense of your career history and what you're doing today, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for asking me, both Peter and Bill. Well, I'll try to keep it short. Like I like to say, BRE, it was bookend. It was my first job out of school, and it was my last job, my last W-2 job, if you will. And in between, I had a number of jobs. Probably most significant was my roles at Security Capital from 93 until 2002 when we sold to GE, and served in a number of capacities there, both in terms of Property Trust of America, which turned into Archstone, took Security Capital Atlantic public in 1996. So had a number of leadership roles at Security Capital. And following that transaction to GE in 2002, I was asked to come back to BRE as part of their CEO succession. So for me, it was really like coming home. And so joined BRE in 2002, September of 2002, became CEO in early 2005. Until our merger in 2014 with Essex, which was a little bittersweet for me because, again, it was my first job and my last job. And I sort of felt like I was the one that killed BRE. But I think it was
you made money for shareholders. That's what you did.
Terrific transaction for shareholders, of which I am still a shareholder. So today I serve in, I would say I manage a portfolio of boards. I'm on 3 public boards. For this call, most interesting, I'm on 1 REIT board. I'm chairman of Columbia Property Trust, which is an office building REIT. And then I serve as the chairman of an audit committee on a company in Houston that provides logistics and workforce housing in the coal mines of Australia coal mines of Australia and the oil sands of Canada, which is particularly interesting. And then I'm chairman of the comp committee of a home builder, Tri Pointe Homes. And so those keep me really busy, and then serve on a couple of university boards and continue to serve in leadership at the Urban Land Institute. So I stay busy, or busy enough, so it's good.
Well, you've always been a very busy and highly productive person. Connie, thank you for joining. You've been involved in formulating strategy of public vehicles, private vehicles, up to and including today, changing times, good times, bad times, etc. Mm-hmm. As you reflect, what mistakes do people fall into? What traps do they fall into in formulating and implementing strategies?
It's a really good question. And I think certainly going through COVID, I think about it a little differently today. I'm certain that enterprise risk reports on all companies always had a list of, worldwide pandemic, that would be a terrible thing. But what was the likelihood of it happening? I suspect all of us said very low. And so today it's really understanding your strategy, but being able to understand how you need to shift when the winds change. So specifically to your question, I think, first of all, understanding your vision and what it is you're trying to achieve, and making sure your strategy, both your strategy and then the tactics that go along with that strategy, are in support of your vision, and keeping it simple. I think sometimes, we like to make things complicated just because it's fun to have a complicated strategy, but you got to be able to execute, and you got to have the team to be able to execute. So I think not falling in love with the next shiny object, understanding your core competencies, what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I think that's really important. And getting buy-in from the organization. What I used to say is let's have a debate. Let's have a good conversation about strategy and what it is we're trying to do. And let's make sure that everybody gets heard. But once everybody's heard and you've defined your strategy, when you leave the room, everybody needs to be in alignment. They don't necessarily have to agree with everything that you're doing, but they need to be in alignment, because if you're not going to be able to execute on your strategy. So I think that's really important. And then understanding the numbers, KPIs as we call it, but understanding the numbers and understanding when you're at an inflection point that might create an opportunity, it might create early warning signs. I think about April of 2010. We were sitting there looking at our numbers because we were really big on numbers at BRE, and it was palatable. You could feel it. All of a sudden, we had, and it sounds very specific, we had no availability in our studio apartments and our 1 bedrooms, but our availability was moving up in 2 bedrooms. What did that mean? It meant that people were coming back from their parents' couches, or they were tired of their roommate and said, I want my own place. And we knew we could shift our pricing strategy, but it also said, you know what? We shifted. We bought more property in 2010 than we had bought in years, because we said, the market is moving. Let's use these numbers and how we're interpreting them as an opportunity to augment our development pipeline that had slowed down during the great financial crisis. But now it was time to shift. And so having that ability to understand where you are, when you can shift confidently, and always going back and looking and sort of what did you learn from those experiences. So I think making sure you've got the team and you can execute, and don't make it too complicated, but make sure that it supports the vision that you have established for your company, and then you won't get off track.
So Connie, let's transition to the subject of leadership for a minute, a subject near and dear to my heart. As I have interviewed various leaders, this whole concept of culture comes up time and time again, and how important it is to driving business success. Can you give us maybe an example over the course of your career where, in fact, that's been the case, and tell us a little bit about the culture and why it led to success?
I'll talk about the transition. It's one of my favorite topics, and I think that it's getting talked about more and more today. But I will tell you, when I started at BRE, I'm not sure the word culture ever came out of anyone's mouth. And so let me just give you that example there, that we knew at BRE that we needed to change our culture. It was not a culture that was based on trust. There was suspicion. It was a little toxic. And so we were very purposeful about thinking about the kind of culture that we wanted. And we knew that it was going to take time. I can remember the 6 of us leaders sitting in the front of the entire organization and saying, all right, ask us any questions. And at first it was anonymous. It was like we would start opening up pieces of paper and nobody wanted to get up and ask the question. And we allowed that for a while. And then we finally said, if we're going to build this on trust, we need people to trust that we will answer their questions authentically, but they need to be brave enough to get up and ask the questions. And I think what I would describe is that we became a feedback culture, so that we would give and take on feedback. So I might say to you, Bill, are you open to some feedback? And you might say, Connie, not right now. Can you get back to me later? Sure, Bill, I'll get back to you, but I am going to give you feedback. I've frequently had people come into my office and say, hey, Connie, can I give you some feedback? And it changed the language, but it started with trust. And it became most evident, I think, when we actually did our transaction with Essex in 2014, because the team knew that I would tell them the truth, tell them that what was happening, how it was impacting the company and how it was, more importantly, how it was going to impact them. Some people knew that they would keep their jobs. Some people knew that they wouldn't keep their jobs. But what they knew was that I would be honest with them. And I think that it was that level of trust. I think one of my proudest moments was during a meeting with the Essex senior leadership and our entire team. And I warned Essex. I said, all right, look, our guys are really used to honest answers, and they're going to get up and ask you questions. And so somebody did, and they said, hey, we know our executives really, really well, and we have a terrific culture here at BRE. Can you explain the culture at Essex? And I remember thinking 3 or 4 years ago, no one would have ever, been brave enough to ask. And so I think culture starts with trust, and it has to come from the top. Because if it isn't supported all the way through the organization, there will be a culture that exists. It may not be the culture that you want. I have seen what happens to a toxic, suspicious culture, and I think that defining how it works for you. I still have people email me saying, I can't believe we had such a great deal at BRE. We had such a great culture. And so I think it's important that you define it, that you're purposeful about it. And it needs to be across all leadership, but it starts with, what is it? Who are we? We were very clear that every encounter that we had, whether it was with an associate, a resident, or a shareholder, or an external vendor, if we always considered that encounter from their point of view, I used to say, we'll be the best company in the world. And so people felt very connected to that. And the culture started to build on itself. So, Bill, it's such an important question today. And it's one of the reasons I worry about, meetings like this, because we're not in the same room. We're not experiencing each other in the same ways that we did before. But culture it's just kind of a hot button for me. And it's trying to understand the culture of, I'm on 3 public boards and on university boards. Every organization has a different culture, and you need to respect it. But how does that filter through the organization? It's just so important.
So, Connie, we're in one of those transitional moments like you were talking about. Maybe it's transitioning for the better or worse, and it depends on the sector. But how do you think about the forming a strategy now for these companies in real time, looking forward the next couple of years? Do you want to bet the ranch? Do you hedge? So I'd be curious of your thoughts.
Well, I don't think you ever want to bet the ranch. That doesn't always work. I think sometimes I wish I was 30 years younger, because I think some of the opportunities that are going to be available as we think about reimagining the built environment are so exciting. I think over the next couple of years, it's how you develop that strategy. Real estate is so long. It is not a video game. I used to say that to analysts who would say, this is not a video game. I can't sell California and buy Austin when you like Austin better than you like California. So it is a long-term game. But I do think, as we think about, and we've had some things revealed during COVID, right? So how do we think about the built environment and how our demographics are changing? And what does that mean? I think the obvious question is, as I said, as the chairman of Columbia, how do we think about office today? Do I believe that the office is dead? No, we just finished talking about culture. I think the office is we've seen how companies have their offices defined who they are and the culture that they want. You can walk into different offices and kind of tell who they are. But how do we think about that, and how much space? And then what do we do with old office buildings that don't work anymore? How are they repositioned? How do we think about housing of all kinds? I think that's going to be one of the challenges for real estate leaders for the next several decades. How do we make housing more affordable, more inclusive, more supportive? We can see the challenges when they're not. I'm sitting here in San Francisco. We can see the issues when we don't have affordable housing, we don't have supportive housing, how it impacts those most affected and those who live here. And so housing is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart. But how do we think about that going forward? How do we think about retail? I've gotten kind of used to having groceries delivered, but am I ever going to go to a grocery store again? Yeah, I think so. And so how do we think about all that and the various different people? And we've got baby boomers, we're all retiring. We all think we're never going to die. We're just going to keep, young and active. But how do we think about that segment that is a very wealthy segment? What do we do with them? And what do we do with the Gen Zs that are, the next in line to start changing the way we think about everything? I think about, driverless cars. It's like, how do I think about, I'll be dead by the time those are really around a lot. But how do we think about space? How do we think about reimagining our cities and our buildings? I think about an apartment building that's got a podium garage, and every podium cannot be an Amazon distribution center. Some can. Some could be urban farms, but what do we do with them when we don't need cars? We've seen during COVID, these great little parklets are now taking up parking spaces on our streets. And it's created a vibrancy in our cities during a period of time when it's not very vibrant. So how do we make that sustainable and structural? Is it a structural change? So I think it's kind of like in 2005, we were working on a project that we thought would stabilize in 2015. So 10 years forward. And I remember sitting down and talking with the team and saying, okay, is everybody going to have a flat screen TV? I know that sounds funny today, but I said, if they do, that changes the way we think about configuring the living room. I said, is anybody going to have a landline? Now, this was before iPhones, but it certainly wasn't before cell phones. So how do we think about that? And how do we think about the space and what is it we're building? And in 2005, I said, our average resident is 27 years old. So in 2005, they were 7. So what was a 7-year-old thinking about at the time? So I think that's the way we have to think about it is, there was just an article the other day in the Wall Street about, is it going to be as easy to rent an apartment as it is to get food delivery? Because everybody wants everything now and fast and convenient and flexible. Well, how does that, for us who are long-term investors, how do we think about a customer who may not want to think about the real estate the same way we do, and how do we think about leases and how do we price them? And so to me, like I said, I wish I was 30 years younger because I think this next several decades are going to be so interesting as we think about how it's shifting, both in terms of demographics and just the current built environment and what do we do with it. COVID has accelerated how we think about some of this stuff. And then it's how quickly we can execute on it. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. But I would be having those strategic questions with my team about what are we doing for the future, and then what are we doing with our existing portfolio, and how do we think about it differently, and where do we want to invest for the long term? So that's how I'd be thinking about it.
Connie, it's interesting because, you talk about BRE, and I can remember sitting with your board, after you joined the company and you were ready to step up and to become a CEO. And the board was populated by, let's say, some senior white males who just were, kind of presenting excuse after excuse. Mm-hmm. And I was quite candid with them. I said, you know what, you committed and you need to step up and you need to do this, because if you don't, you're going to lose a very talented executive who could be your next CEO. And to their credit, after some angst, they did it. And I do give them credit, but they were a little bit symbolic of the culture you referred to, for sure. Mm-hmm. But as you think about the time from when you joined BRE, and then you ultimately were selected as CEO until you did your transaction with Essex, obviously your first time CEO, probably a lot of leadership lessons learned. But what was the one that kind of stood out for you from the time that you became CEO to the time that you ultimately consummated the transaction with Essex?
Well, I probably have a lot of lessons. I would think the one that stands out is not making the people decisions soon enough. In terms of you know in your gut that something's not right and that you need to make some changes. But sometimes it's just easier to stay the course and sort of say, oh, that person, they know where all the skeletons are buried. They know all this stuff. So I'm just not going to make a change. I don't want to have to bring on somebody new and develop them and train them. But when I ultimately made the decisions, is like, why didn't I do this sooner? So I think listening to my gut when I knew that something wasn't right, and it happened a couple times at BRE, and in the end, I was very happy with the decisions I made. It just took me too long, and so I think, I would say it's like listening to your gut, but the word listening is just listening, not only to yourself but to your team, and authentically listening and understanding how that supports or doesn't support your vision.
And Peter, I don't know if you remember, but John Gray said the same thing. Remember when we asked him that question?
Yeah.
It's
is that right?
very interesting response. Yeah.
It's a common theme of.
Well, it's so funny when I got my MBA, it was kind of like, I thought about finance or management, and I remembered as I was 25, it's like, oh, management, that's so easy, that's just people. And as I've realized, it's the people. It's the people. The finances will follow. You got the finances that people.
Funny you say that, Connie, because over the years I get a million former students calling me for advice in their lives, and very rarely do they call on a technical issue, right? It's always that idiot or that coworker or that partner or this investor, and it's to what you're saying. So, Connie, if I don't know if your parents are still alive, but
they are not.
They are not. So, suppose I told you I have a terrific connection with the other side, and I've got them on that line. And I said, what makes you most proud of Connie? What do you think they would be saying?
First of all, I need to know which side they're on. But
the right side.
So it's a really hard question. I know Bill probably heard this before. But I am the middle of three girls, all raised to go to college for 2 years to get culture and then get married and have children, which is exactly what my two sisters did. So my parents were, I have to say, disappointed that I did not do that. But I do think, now being wherever they are, reflecting on my life, I think they would feel like that I have done something good with my success, so that I think they would be proud. They were always, education was important to them. It's just kind of weird what they thought we were going to do with it, but education was important. I am the first in the family to graduate from college. So I think they were very proud of that. A little nervous about me getting my graduate degree, but I think they ultimately became over that. But I think they would be proud with what I've done with it and how I've tried to give back. So it's not all been about buying bigger and better cars and bigger and better houses, but it's about how have I given back. So I think that's what they would probably be the most proud of.
So Connie, let's talk about this concept of mentorship. And I know firsthand you have been a mentor to a number of executives across the industry. But if somebody asked you about the person who was most influential as far as being your mentor and what you might have learned, what would you say?
That's a great question. Of course, when I started, the word mentor or sponsor, that didn't exist. But I would say there was a couple of bosses early on in my first stint at BRE. One of my first bosses, because I had so many early successes. I'm not really sure why, but I had just a lot of early successes at BRE, and I remember him saying, "Don't rest on your laurels," and that made sure that I never got lazy. And then I had what I would call today, we would call him a sponsor, but you have to remember, in 1977, I started as this analyst. I was the only, well, I was the only woman in the office other than the administrative staff. So I was a bit of a novelty, but he would take me to lunch 2 and 3 times a week to introduce me to people in the industry. Whether we were doing a deal with them or not, they invited me into the board of trustees meetings. So they exposed me in a way that, I feel so blessed. But that I have used that and said, you know what, that's a way to help expose young people today. So I spend a lot of time either mentoring and or sponsoring people because I know how important it was for me. And it allowed me to get places that maybe I wouldn't have done on my own. So those are the two. They were very early on, but they left an impression that I have used and my whole career. And I think finally, I do remember when I left BRE the first time, and I left right before we got our bonuses paid. And it was time for me to leave. And 3 months after I left, the CEO called me and he said, "We're going to pay you your bonus for 1982 because you were as much a part of our success in 82 as anyone." And that, no matter who left BRE, I would say they get, if we weren't terminating them, they earned their bonus, and we're going to pay. It made such an impression on me that people cared enough about my contributions. So I think those are probably a couple of things that they just stuck with me for now 40 some odd years.
No, but that's terrific. So you mentioned earlier giving back. How does behind Bill is a sign that says integrity and generosity, and
I know I've seen that. I've seen that.
So you might talk, if you be kind enough, a moment on philanthropy of your time, of your energy, of your resources, how and why, and what if you.
Well, I think. For me, I know how blessed I have been. I am not a person that our family did not come from money. That's not who we were. And so I've been so fortunate, and real estate has been so good to me. One of my associates, BRE used to talk about what's your flag, walking to the top of the mountain and putting your flag on the top of the mountain. And everybody at BRE would describe their flag. And I remember saying to her, I said, my goal and my flag is to make a lot of money, not for me, but so I can give it back. And so for me, it's about time. So a lot of the, serving on a number of nonprofits is about giving your time, but it's also about giving your resources and your funds, because nothing happens without money. We know that. And so whether it's supporting the football team at San Jose State, I don't know if you guys can see it, I have the game ball. We just won the Mountain West Championship, never won a championship ever. So my husband and I got the game ball. So, but it's about giving resources. I'm on Bridge Housing, and we are working on a program to narrow the digital divide that has become so obvious during COVID, and providing Chromebooks and education for the kids and their parents, so that even when school starts again, every kid in a Bridge Housing, every kid, not just the family, has a Chromebook so that they can go to school. And so for me, it's about how do we give back and how do I support. I can't save the world, but I can do some things that that will enhance the lives. And I know how transformative education was for me. So if I can do that to just a small set of people, it's really important to me. That would be a legacy. I would not, I used to say, I don't want my eulogy to say, oh, wow, yeah, she worked really hard. I don't want to, I did, but as in how I want to be remembered.
And Connie, as a wrap-up question, in your conversation about both the excitement and uncertainty of change going forward, let's assume you're in one of your board leadership capacities, and around the table is the next generation of leadership for the company on whose board you serve. what kind of wisdom would you impart to the next generation of leaders as they become ready to take over the business?
First, stay curious. I think curiosity and understanding trends and what's happening, good or bad, and how that's impacting what it is you're doing. But I think staying curious, and then listening, authentically listening and communicating. And I think we're seeing more of that today. I'm seeing a lot of that just in terms of the events that have occurred over the last 12 to 14 months have really revealed a lot of lack of listening for a very long time. So I think staying curious and really listening, not only to yourself and your gut, but listening to those around you and being clear about what it is you're trying to do, but also staying flexible because stuff happens and you got to be able to adjust. But I would say being curious first and foremost to understanding trends and what do the trends mean for today and the future.
So, Bill, I'll let you take us home.
Well, Connie, I'm envious because I went to a college where the highlight of the football game was the band at halftime. So I'm never sure that any of us have ever been given a game ball. But anyway, this has been terrific.
Thank you.
You are a true blend of being heartfelt and being thoughtful. And it's, you've had a great run in the industry and you're now contributing from a governance perspective. And Peter and I very, very, very much appreciate you being part of our leadership series. So thank you.
Thank you so much for asking.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.